mentor, and actor. He has become well known for his highly acclaimed creation of innovative and behavioral changing courses. The unique curriculum includes diversity education, cross-cultural competence, sensitivity training, and team building. Additionally, Mr. Cohen has extensive experience in education, educating others regarding anti-racism by sharing skills that diffuse tense or stressful situations, which can arise in anyone's personal or professional life. As the son of a Black Panther turned preacher, Andre has learned at an early age the importance of reaching across cultural lines to seek understanding and acceptance. He has received awards and honors during his career, being named Human Rights Worker of the Year by the National Association of Human Rights and the American Red Cross Marketing and Community Presentation Volunteer of the Year Award. So at this time, please welcome Andre Cohen.
So it's always embarrassing to hear all that stuff that you've written about yourself. So I wanted to put that out there. And I really want to share with you, so our conversation is, if you don't mind, going to be a bit more relaxed than I would in a more formal setting. And so I really want to have some conversations about some of the diversity challenges that we're currently facing. So we have, Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, which I think is an interesting dichotomy, because I think a Black life is a life. So if all lives matter, then obviously Black Lives Matter, right? We have tons of issues around sexual violence that play themselves out along gender lines that we're facing. Some of our heroes have befallen some pretty dastardly deeds, and so those ripple effects are carried on into other places. We have this idea that there's this idea out there that young people have, that old heads, which I am now a part of that group, weren't diligent in doing our job, so now they have to clean up our messes. Now recognizing the mess that we inherited, and they inherited something much better than what we had. And then we have people who have confused a number of critical concepts in terms of being effective at this particular work. And so discrimination has become everything, or racism is everything, when in fact there are some important distinctions that we have to make if we're going to be effective in this work. And there is, as you pointed out in the discussion of CEDAW, that there are tons of things that the United States as a country has not adopted, that the rest of the world has said we will deal with these things. And then you have the quandary that people are in, that most people don't know what their civil rights are. And so as they get taken away, they're thinking, what's the big deal? And so I want to talk about some of those things today. So, and I believe that this idea of diversity can be used as a tool for leadership. That diversity, in fact, can be a tool for leadership. But to understand this idea of diversity being a tool for leadership, we have to understand human beings in and of themselves. We have to understand the motivations of human beings. And I believe that there are 4 truths about human beings. First is that we can, as human beings, we can learn, change, and grow, even when we don't see evidence of it. So there was a time as a young person, I would drag my feet when I walked, and that would scuff up the back of my shoes as well as destroy my pants. and my parents would get on me, they put me on punishment, they've had all these behavior modification tools at their disposal, and they did not see any change. But I will tell you, I did change. And it's amazing what happens when you buy your pants and when you buy your shoes. It's changed. So human beings can learn, change, and grow even when we don't see the evidence of it. We also recognize that people do what they think works even when what?
It doesn't.
Even when it doesn't work. But why do people do things that don't work on a consistent basis? Well, why are they doing this thing that's not giving them results and they're not getting what they want out of that behavior? Why do they keep doing that behavior? So they don't know other options. What else?
And access.
Lack of access. They're stubborn. Yes.
Just sort of stubborn. Well, I was gonna say, no respect for authority.
Okay, so there's no respect for authority. Lack of education. Status quo. So I don't know if you've ever seen a kid fall out in a store.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So it's usually the candy aisle, the cereal aisle,
Or the toy aisle.
right? And the kid, right? Whenever I see that, I make the assumption that that's not the kid's first time.
Right.
So why is the kid doing this in the toy aisle? And I had to reflect back on my own stories at Circle K.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that I realized was that this is probably not the kid's first time doing it, and the last time they did it, they probably got what they wanted. And so people continually do these behaviors, even though they're ineffective. They do them because they worked at a certain time. But what do people typically fail to realize in terms of looking at that behavior? What changes? Everything else. Mr. Peterson got caught up in this concept. He didn't understand this particular concept. And so he got in trouble. I believe he's back at work now, but he had to take a year off from work. And why was that? Why was he asked to leave the Vikings team for a season?
Because his legal issue.
Okay, so what was
child
his
abuse.
Okay, so it was
Alleged child.
it was alleged child abuse,
Right.
and so the team had him take some time off.
Right.
Right.
Because
Well,
they
I don't think it's elected anymore.
But because- well,
Okay, so
he played-
and I'm not exactly, I'm not on his attorney, I'm not on his legal team, so I'm not exactly sure exactly but I do know he's back at work, right?
Right.
But they asked him to take some time off because of some child abuse issues, right?
Right.
Now, I don't know if you heard his defense. Did anyone hear his defense?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he's defensible in what he did, but I'm saying this was his defense seemed very logical,
Yeah.
given, and then what was that defense that he used for his behavior?
Because it happened to me.
Because that's how I was raised. It happened to me. But what did Mr. Peterson what did he fail to realize?
That you
That the context had changed. And so oftentimes people are exhibiting behaviors, not because they're malicious people, not because they want to inflict harm on folks, but they fail to realize that the context has changed. So the third.
I'm taking a little bit further though than the context. I think also because it was a repetitive generational, sounds like behavior or response to a child or growing up, this is something he was also used to. So even though the context today may have changed, it was the norm.
And in many cases,
Yes.
yes.
I would just also say, Mr. Peterson is a public figure,
Uh-huh.
and there is some kind of pedestal in which he's put on, whether he wants to be or he doesn't want to be, but there's some kind of box he's put himself in, and if he steps outside the box, then he, in essence, reflecting of the team. So the team doesn't want to say that we accept this behavior as a team, because if they would have elected, so there was political reasons as
There
well.
there are always political reasons, right?
He got caught.
And,
Might have been mad at him.
yeah, so there are lots of things, right? And what I would say is that the pattern of repetitive behavior is also contextual, right? So we all come out of a context. We are not an island to ourselves. We didn't birth ourselves. We came from people who came from people, right? And so that context becomes extremely important. We'll get a chance to talk about that in just a bit. Also, all human behavior is goal-directed. So the first thing is that all human beings can learn, change, and grow. The second is that people do what they think works even when it doesn't, because it's worked in the past and the context has changed. Thirdly, all human behavior is goal-directed. I don't believe in true altruism, that people just do things because it's a good thing to do. I actually believe that people do things because it benefits them in some kind of way. Maybe that is a cognitive thing, or maybe it's a subconscious thing, or maybe it's a genetic thing. But they do things that is, what's that? Or a social thing, right? And so and there are people who can dispute that, and I'd say go for it. But for the sake of our discussion, we're going to talk about the goals that human beings have, because that allows us to actually help advance people's behaviors and thoughts and keep them accountable to themselves. And then lastly, an attitude is a sign of it. An attitude is not a real thing. It is an illusion, or it is something that will allude us to something greater. And so what have you been taught about an attitude? What is an attitude?
Attitudes are adjustable.
Okay, attitudes are adjustable. What is an attitude?
An expression
An expression
of how you feel.
of how you feel about things. All right? Attitude. It's someone's reaction. All of those are great definitions, and those would have been inadequate for my parents. My parents went to this place called Old School. They used to say it all the time. And I asked them, they said, "Where's your diploma? Where is Old School? Let's go to your old school class reunion."
And how did that work for you?
That didn't work out. Right? So they and my parents would say stuff, and my parents did their best to not raise us like their parents. They wanted to be better parents.
Right.
But when that didn't work, they went back to what they knew, which was screaming and yelling. And my parents would say the most bizarre things. Like my dad would say, "Boy, I don't like your attitude. You better fix your face."
Yeah.
And so I would. And he'd send me to my room. Well, my mother would say, she'd say, "Boy, you better go to your room until you get your act together." So I would. I'd be in there for a while, and then I'd step out into the hallway, and I'd say, "To be or not to be?" I spent a lot of time. Because that's not what they were talking about. But I finally got it. And I'm a late bloomer. So when I was 17, I finally got it. So my dad was my pastor. So on Sunday, we would go to church from 7:30 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. We stop at 3 o'clock for chicken, not because we're black, but because chicken is delicious. So church all day on Sunday. So Friday night, I asked my dad for the car. My dad loves me, so what does he say?
No.
He says, "Yes, he loves me." So I get the keys. I'm hanging out with my friends. We're cruising for girls. I don't know what would have happened had we found girls. But we're cruising for girls. I come home before curfew. I fill the car with gas. I toss my dad the keys, and he says, "I have what kind of an attitude? A good attitude, a positive attitude, right?"
Uh-huh.
So Sunday, My best friend Dexter calls me at noon and says, Andre, can you pick me up from the movies? What do I know about Sunday? Church all day. But I'm 17. I'm invincible. And Jesus is my friend. So I go to my dad and I say, Dad, can I borrow the car? What does my dad say?
No.
Not only does he say no, but he gives me the hell sermon. In our household, the worst punishment you could get was going to hell. And either you could go to hell on your own, or my dad would show you the way. As a result, what would I say about my dad's interaction? He's got a bad attitude, thus I have what? A bad attitude as well. So what was the difference between Friday night and Sunday?
Well, that was his day.
So that was
And
his
that-
day.
And Friday was your day.
Okay.
Yeah, your expectations. You were meeting his expectations
I was
on
meeting his
Friday.
expectations.
You didn't like that.
I didn't like his answer. Anyone have a young person in your life? Anyone ever been a young person in your life?
Yeah.
So what happens, and I want you to think about this, what happens to the attitude when you tell that young person, no?
Yeah, like real quick, like a 45.
Yeah,
All of a sudden, woo!
that quick, right?
I sometimes ask myself, what did you do with my son?
Yes, where is he, right?
Bring him back.
And then what happens when you say yes?
Oh, thanks, Mom, you're the best.
That's when you get the Facebook password.
Yeah.
Right then, that's when you get it. So what is it that actually determines an attitude? It is goal accomplishment. When people get what they want, / what they need, they have a good attitude. When they don't get what they need, or they're denied or delayed access to what they need or what they want, they have a bad attitude. So what do you know when you see someone with a bad attitude? They're not getting something that they want. So then as helpers, and this becomes very critical when we start talking about what it means to be a municipality, what it means to have people who are coming to us for help or for services. Because sometimes we get so caught up in their attitude that we forget to ask, what is your goal? What should I be helping you do, right? So there's this thing I call the gorilla dance. And I saw it on the Discovery Channel, right? And it was these two gorillas. One was an older silverback gorilla, and one was a younger kind of silverback gorilla. And those things are huge, ginormous, right? I sit next to the one at Como, when you come into the glass sometimes. Like, hey, do something. So those things are ginormous. And one of the things that I saw in this animal Discovery Channel episode was I noticed that there were no hospitals in the forest. So there are no hospitals in the forest. And so the alpha gorilla, the older one, is walking his territory. The younger gorilla sees all his gorilla I don't know how they organize themselves, but all the little female gorillas, and he's like, I want a female gorilla. So he comes up and he comes to the borderline, and the old silverback starts going, ah, like that. And the young gorilla is like, ooh. And so, but he doesn't move. And so the older silverback, he starts grabbing up grass, and and the young one's not moving. So then the silverback decides to just go ape. Right? And so he grabs the grass, he's showing teeth, he's beating his chest. And why is he doing that? To show his power. He's being assertive.
Show them the dominant one.
Show him that he's the dominant one in hopes that the young gorilla will do what? Go away. Why? Because there are no hospitals in the forest. If two 500-pound gorillas start feeding on each other, what's going to happen to one of them? They're going to die, right? And so when we talk about this, the part of our relationship, particularly with the community, they can kick up a lot of attitude. They can kick up a lot of stuff. But that shouldn't waver us from making sure that they get the services that they deserve, not only because they're a taxpayer, but because they're a human being. There are certain ways that even when human beings don't act to the top of their intelligence or their full humanity, we still have to give them that treatment of humanity. And so when we talk about this idea of what are these three goals that people are looking for, people are looking for significance, they're looking for belonging, and they're looking for safety. Significance basically says that I am a person with purpose and power. I was born for a reason. Whether that reason is something that comes from the heavens or something that I decide myself. But I'm a person with purpose and power. The next thing is that people are looking for belonging. They're looking to be in relationships with people who understand their significance. I want to be in relationship with people, either in an intimate relationship, a friendship, a collegial work responsibility relationship that understand what my purpose is and what my significance is. And lastly, people are looking for safety. They want to be physically, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually safe to be in relationship so that their purpose is recognized. And so it's funny, people will ask questions when I do sessions in the broader community. They'll ask questions like, Andre, why are all those people, ... moving into my neighborhood?
The open houses.
She said because they're open house. Right? Why are they moving into my neighborhood? They're moving into your neighborhood the same reason you moved into your neighborhood. They're looking for significance. They're looking for belonging. They're looking for safety. Why are kids joining gangs? They're looking for significance. They're looking for belonging. They're looking for safety. Why are kids, acting out in school? They're looking for significance. They're looking for belonging. They're looking for safety. Now, this is the most interesting thing about this, or at least I find this to be very interesting, that even kids who are autistic, they're looking for these things too. But guess what? They look different when you're dealing with a kid on the autism spectrum. They look different when you're dealing with someone who's been a refugee from war. They look different when someone has been, historically traumatized by American colonialism. That seeking significance, belonging, and safety looks very different when the stories of slavery still run through your family's memories. And so when we talk about that safety, significance, and belonging, we all want the same things. But how we go about them oftentimes can be very different. And why is that? What creates that difference is context. Context is very interesting because context is about place, it's about time, it's about the use of space. So, and what do we know is true about context? It changes. How often? All the time. It is constantly changing. Context is changing, right? So the dinosaurs that are in that picture, they're no longer around. Why? The context changed and they could not survive. They could not adapt to the changing context, right? So let's flip over to that next page. And so in the United States, we operate in a particular context. And that is important for us to realize because as we're working with families, as we're working with city officials, as we're working to make sure that people have their human rights, we have to tell the truth about our existence. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I just have I realized I asked questions.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I didn't know. So what I feel a lot is that from people, because I work with immigrant parents and families and people, that they were told that they must assimilate to the American, so they must forget their home language, must forget, and that's exactly what I was told when I was 4. That I must assimilate to the American culture, or I'll never make it.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of us immigrants have lost our language, our context. We've lost who we are.
Yeah.
And so, how do we then regain it back and to have a strong voice in our city?
So this is one of the things that I think is very interesting, because tucked inside of this idea of assimilation is, or one of the side effects of assimilation is this illusion of the loss of humanity, right?
Mhm.
And so one of the things that we know is that human beings operate in a context that through the biological process, any way you mix that biological process of male and female DNA, what is the result of that process? So you take human, male,
Babies,
what kind of babies?
human babies?
Human babies, right? So no matter how you mix it up, you always come out with human babies. Now, is a human baby ever less than a human baby? No. Whether they have 10 toes, 10 fingers or not, right? If they have a cleft palate, if they have spina bifida, if they have cerebral palsy, all of those things, they still are human. Now, part of what happens with assimilation is that it tries to tell people that they're not human unless you do this, that, and the other. Or that there's one way to be human, which is whatever the dominant culture is in that particular culture. What's that?
My way.
My way, right? Now, here's, you made me jump forward a little
Sorry,
bit. So, no, it's good. I'm going to jump forward and I'm going to jump back. Because this is something that we also need to recognize. So, we have been lulled to sleep, and many of the people who are out in the library right now have come under this spell. And the spell is called race. We believe that race exists, and I will tell you that it does. But it's not what you think it is. One of the things that I think is really telling about this concept of race, and I'll tell it through this story, right? So I like the Ford F-150 truck. Does everybody know what a Ford F-150 looks like, right? So if I take my Ford F-150 from Maple Grove and I drive it down to Mexico, what is it?
Truck.
What kind of truck?
The same.
It's the same truck. It's a Ford F-150.
Sorry, I couldn't
So let's say I'm courageous and I drive it all the way down to Chile.
Same thing.
Same thing. So if I get ingenuitous and I figure out how to get a barge and I drive it all the way over to West Africa. So I go to Liberia. What is the truck?
Good.
It's a Ford F-150. But then I just want to go visit down in Swaziland. So I go through South Africa into Swaziland, drive around. The truck is a Ford F-150. Drive over to Madagascar. It's a Ford F-150. Take another ferry all the way over to Australia. Ford F-150. Drive it up through Thailand. Ford F-150. Go up China, up through the Bering Strait, across to Alaska, back over here, and it continues to be a Ford F-150. However, if I was born in South Africa, I would have a different racial category. If I was born in the Dominican Republic and I came to the United States, I'd have a different designation. One of the things that we have to realize is that this idea of race, that not only is it a social construct, It is a political construct designed to organize people in a specific way. Each country has their own way of organizing their people differently. And so we have to unmask that. So when we say you have to assimilate, what do you really mean? Now, one of the things that I did when I taught social studies to so-called underprivileged kids was I taught them middle-class white values. Not because I wanted them to assimilate, but I wanted to know what the expectations that other people had of them were so they could make better choices about the decisions they wanted to make. And so we're at a point where, so there are two things, right, that happen. And actually, let's do this really quick. If you can turn back to the open space on page 2, because I think this might be helpful. So what I'd like you to do is somewhere on there draw a facsimile of a carrot with its stem. It's a facsimile of the carrot and its stem. Yeah.
But I don't have that.
Yeah. So that's roughly that's a rough facsimile of a carrot and its stem. Okay? So, what is the relationship between the carrot and its stem? Is there a relationship between those two things? Okay, so what is that relationship?
They're one and the same.
They're one and the same. So they're certainly connected. What else? One can't exist without the other. So how does that relationship play out? So what do you mean by that? So they're interdependent. So what does that interdependence look like? So what does the top do for the bottom? Provides nutrients from where? From the sun, right? So we got the sun out here, provide nutrients. And what does the bottom do for the top? It soaks up the water, gives it back things to the top, right? So when we talk about this idea of culture, we talk about cultural assimilation. We'll also talk about cultural appropriation, right? Let's call the bottom of the carrot value. Values. So write that down at the bottom of the carrot. Values. And at the top of the carrot, write the word artifacts. So there's a symbiotic relationship between the artifacts and the values, right? So when I see a woman in a hijab, it is not just a fashion statement. It is a statement of values. Now, many of you might not remember, there was a group called Criss Cross.
Oh, yes, I remember.
And they wanted to make you jump.
Yeah. And they made me jump up.
They made you jump. So, but Criss Cross had this thing where they wanted people to wear their clothes backwards. Do you get it? Okay, right? Why do you think that didn't last very long? Because it wasn't comfortable.
It wasn't functional either.
And it wasn't functional, and nobody valued it but Criss Cross. So that culture did what? With small or no value. What happened to it? It didn't survive and died, right? So culture has its artifacts, and they're related. Now, one of the things that happens, so if you could draw another set of carrot and stem, but I want you to disconnect the stem from the carrot. So what typically happens in this process of assimilation, so if you disconnect the stem from the carrot, and you just do that with an X, and just I'm working you through a mental model. We still have our value and we have our artifacts, but now they're disconnected. What do you think is going to happen to the carrot? It's going to shrivel up and die. It is going to shrivel up and die. So without my artifacts, what happens to my values and my culture? can you say Ellis Island? Right? Tons of folks had to leave things either on the ship, on the shore. They had to leave things at Ellis Island. They got their names changed. They had this whole new identity that they had to take on, and people feel a great loss about that, right? So the other thing that happens is that when the artifacts have been disconnected from the culture, the artifacts become stereotypes. I don't know. Yes, ma'am.
You know, there's something else here as well. And that is that, in the first example, the top of the carrot in no way resembles the bottom of the carrot. And if all you see is the top, you make such erroneous assumptions about the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
So if all we see and all we know are the artifacts, without knowing anything about the values, we're completely missing the integrity of the unity of the top and the carrot.
Absolutely correct. And the next, and once we either start making looking at those stereotypes, or we start making those assumptions, or we miss out, we do something even more dangerous, which is we start to appropriate the artifacts without having that holistic view of what this really means, right? And so they turn my favorite holiday into a mockery of humanity. I was born on October 30th, so I loved Halloween as a kid, right? But now it's a mockery, and actually I appreciate what they're doing because it keeps trainers like myself employed, right? Because they dress up as the marketing system tries to dress people up as other people. I have some relatives that are Native American, and on their job, someone from another country came in and asked who they were or what they were, and she said, "I'm Native American," and he says, "No, you're not. They don't exist any longer because where they were raised, they talked negatively about Native Americans or had incomplete or no information about Native Americans, and so that becomes extremely crucial. And when we start to culturally appropriate, we have to recognize, why are people culturally appropriating? Or what I would suggest is worse, is cultural misappropriation, right? So if I borrow things from a culture just to survive, that makes sense because I'm going to adapt to the environment that I'm in, right? And there's a difference between adaptation and assimilation. Assimilation suggests that you get rid of all of your stuff and take on all of my stuff. Adaptation says I can have both. I need to know how to live in two worlds, right? So those are important concepts.
I hope that we're down adaptation. This is if you're gonna bring it up.
Yeah.
Because it seems like that's what you were talking about with your kids.
Yeah.
And I just, that you're talking, applying these, what you're talking about to all kinds of different situations that we're living in.
Yeah.
Especially with our school systems.
Yeah. When I figured this stuff out, because I was the person in school that would tell all the kids to pull up their pants. I was writing tickets, and I got so bad that I started doing it outside the school. I see people around, I say, pull up your pants, or I ask them, and for whatever reason, I don't know why, with my personality, they would, right? So that was the interesting thing. Right? No. So for whatever reason, it worked. But I stopped asking people to pull up their pants when I got this information, when this became knowledgeable to me. Because what I recognize is that there may be some times that you need to walk around with your pants hanging down. For them, not for me. For them, right? And so what I had to teach my students was, you know what? There are some times when you have to have your pants hanging down, but there are definitely advantages in other situations to having them pulled up, right? And I say the same thing, with my colleagues around the Black Lives Matter. There is a time to stand up and yell and scream, blah, blah, blah. But if you do that every time, people stop listening to you, So context is extremely important. And so how do you adapt to those contexts? How do you move and flow? One of the things that I think is really beautiful about the Black Lives Matter movement right now, which is also indicative of an inheritance that they received both from the Panthers as well as from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, is that their power comes from their ambiguity. That's what their power is. So what's your 5-point plan? We don't have one. Well, how do I dismantle your organization if you're not organized? Right? So, who do I lock up first so I can get this done with and we can move on? Right? There's nobody to lock up. There's no card-carrying members. People show up. People blah blah blah. And so I think that's something about the people's movement, right? That is important. But we also have some things we have to reconcile in the United States, and some of those things are looking at how we've tried to deal with our dual nature as a country. We had this dual nature, right? 1776, we're holding slaves. While what? Fighting for our independence. Right? So we come up with these great things, right? We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare and the securing of blessings and prosperity to ourselves and our posterity. We do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Declaration of Independence, paragraph 2. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of... Right? So wonderful words! While we are holding other folks in bondage. Now, here's the thing, and I've heard some people say this, and I think it's cute that they say this. They say, well, if you look at the numbers numerically, the United States was much better with slaves than in other parts of the world.
That's
right?
That's
So this is their rationale, right? So 41% of slaves that left Africa ended up in South America, the majority of which were in Brazil. So 41%. The other 40% ended up in the West Indies and in Central America, right? Which is why Belize looks like it does, why Haiti looks like it does. Those were lands inhabited by original peoples that we might call Indians, right? So that's 80%. The other 15% ended up being dispersed throughout Europe. And the United States only took 5% of the whole cut. Now, here's the interesting thing about that. What the other part of that truth means that in Europe, where did most of their slave holdings happen? Was it in Europe or outside of Europe? It was outside of Europe, right? In the United States, where did all their slave holdings happen? In the United States, right? So the United States came up with something very interesting and said, you know what? It is very costly to import these slaves. So we're going to stop importing them because we figured out how to breed them ourselves. So when we talk about this idea of Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter, when we talk about the systems of policing, we talk about the systems of government, when we talk about those things, all of those things were part of helping to control the breeding process in this economic system called slavery. Now, one thing that I do want to make clear is that oftentimes when we talk about this idea of slavery, people get, particularly white people, get defensive about that. But I want to be clear about who the slave owners were. They were rich, influential white men. I saw a movie once, and this is how they escape. This is how they escape, right? So in the movie, there was this these bank robbers who went in and they robbed the bank, and they brought these bags in with them, these huge duffel bags. And so they walk in and they rob the bank, and then they make all of the people, all the hostages, and all the people in the bank put on this outfit of a jumpsuit and a mask. And guess what the robbers did as well? They put on the jumpsuit and the mask. And they said, all right, we're going to release all the hostages. And guess what happened? The bank robbers walked right out of the bank with the hostages.
Right.
When we talk about when we talk about reconstruction, that's what was being reconstructed. That the bank robbers they hid they hid in this concept called whiteness. And they told white people who didn't have that you can be like me, but just hide me. Think like me, assimilate, and you too can. But I would tell you, my kids in Frogtown, it will be very difficult for my white kid in Frogtown to sit and be equal with Mitt Romney or with John Kerry. I can't imagine that even if he had the educational prowess that they have, that they would allow my white kid from Frogtown to marry one of their daughters without protest, right? So even that concept of whiteness has some failings. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the steps that we've made moving forward. 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation is signed, releasing people out of their servitude. 1920, women get the right to vote. 1924, the Polk Act is signed, giving Native Americans citizenship rights, which is interesting. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act is signed, and some might say that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was overkill because the 13th Amendment to the Constitution gave everybody access to what they were supposed to have. And so the 64 Civil Rights Act some deem it as overkill because people weren't giving people their constitutional rights. And then 1978, American Freedom of Religion Act, Native American Freedom of Religion Act is signed, giving them the right to worship however they wish. And then 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act happens, which does what for whom?
Very little for those with disabilities.
I can tell you from, yeah,
Okay, so what was it designed to do?
it was designed to allow us the ability to be around our typical fields, but that is not what happened.
Yeah, so in its design, it was to give all of us equal access. Because if you live long enough, you will be what?
I mean,
You will have something that prevents you from your everyday normal activities, right? And so that's what it was designed to do. And we know all of these things. Now this, I'm going to say something very risky in the few minutes that I have. I'm going to say something very risky. I believe that communism is a good, it has a good plan. I believe that socialism has a good plan. I believe that democratic representative democracies have a good plan. But what fouls up good plans? People, right? So in all of these cases, these were really great efforts, but when you add people to the mix, then things get really, really wonky. The last thing I want to do in the time that I have is just talk about these three concepts that are particularly crucial to our work, and that is bigotry, prejudice, and discrimination. Because they get used interchangeably, it becomes difficult to actually know what to do when those things happen, right? And so, has anyone encountered a bigot before, or seen them on TV or talk? Okay, right? So, what is our prescription for bigots, or what do we see that is wrong with a bigot? what do we typically say? They're
Idiot.
idiots.
Yeah.
They're ignorant, right? Well, I'm a teacher. I have the cure for ignorance. And what is the cure for ignorance? Education. So I would encounter bigots, and I would say, bigots, that's wrong. Here's some data. Here's some statistics. Here's some authentic information. And the more information I would give the bigot, the more they would dig in, and they would dig in until finally they would tell me what was wrong with them. They would say, Andre, I don't care what you say. This is how I feel. Oh, bigotry is an emotional state. Does information change emotions? No, it doesn't. The only thing that changes emotions are other emotions. And what is the strongest emotion? And it is not fear. Love. If you want a bigot to change, you have to love them. I know it sounds weird. I mean, that is just the bizarrest thing I've ever heard. You have to love somebody who hates you? Yes!
Yeah.
Right? So prejudice. Prejudice is a thought process. And how do you change people's thoughts? That's a trick question. How do you change people's thoughts? You don't. Who changes their thoughts?
They do.
They do, right? So I learned this by watching Perry Mason. One of my I love Perry Mason. Brother was smooth, right? He comes to the court be going on. He walk in and the music playing. You walk in and Perry's in front of the court, and now everybody's all excited because Perry's here. They're like, Perry. And so he's there, and he looks at the judge, and he nods, and the judge nods back, and so he goes over to the other side. And he said, I'd just like to approach the witness, and he says, okay, go ahead. And he says, witness, I just want to know of some right? And the opposing attorney said, I object! And everybody's all up in arms, and people are standing up, and the judge is pounding, order in my court, objection sustained. And Perry goes, I'm sorry, I withdraw my question. Ooh, that brother was smooth, right? Now, Perry's a smart guy. He must have anticipated that the other side would object to that question. But why did Perry ask the question?
The minds of people.
Because he wanted to plant a seed. He wanted to get into the minds of the people so that they would what? Think differently. Right? So when we meet prejudiced people who are frozen in their way of thinking, how do you thaw that? You ask questions. I don't talk to teenagers. Stop talking to them years ago. I just ask questions. And finally they go, stop. Because they can act like they ignore you, but you keep asking questions, they can't ignore the questions. Right? So when we meet prejudiced people, so is there another news channel that gives different information than that? Can I read that book that you got that particular idea from? Where else is there anybody else that can corroborate what you say about those people? Right? You start asking those questions, the prejudiced person starts, well, I don't know, and that's where you want it. Right? That's where you want it. And then lastly, this idea of discrimination. Discrimination is a behavior. And who said that they will take care of inappropriate behaviors in civil settings? The government. The federal government said, right? So I'm in work and somebody grabs me on the butt and we're not on the softball team together. What do we call that? Sexual harassment, right? And then we go down a whole legal process, and the only way that I can get quasi-justice is through the justice system. And so when we think about those three things, why do we still have discrimination? So what I know in terms of human behavior, that emotions plus thoughts dictate people's behaviors. And you'll hear kids say it all the time. I don't feel like doing that, right? Yeah. So their thoughts and their emotions dictate their behavior. So if we still have discrimination, why is that?
Because we haven't worked on the first two pieces.
That's right. And how do we work on bigotry and how do we work on prejudice?
Love and ask questions.
We have to love and we have to ask questions, which means that we have to be close to those people who drive us crazy. I read political stuff from other points of view that I don't share, so I know what's going on with them. So when I encounter a young person or I encounter an adult who has that point of view, I can see their point of view. Because what are they trying to get? Even through their most obtuse, crazy, bizarre behavior, they're trying to get safety, significance, and belonging. And if I can remember that, I can work with anybody. My name is Andre Cohen. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Any questions, comments? All my information should be right there on the front cover.
Andre, I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
What is the difference between the Black lives and the all lives? Because it seems like people get aggressive when you say all lives,
Yeah.
when somebody's saying Black lives. You know, I think somebody on TV, I don't know if it was a senator or something, and somebody asked him, "What do you think Black lives matter?" He said, "Well, I think all lives matter." And they crucified him.
Yeah. So here's the political difference between those 2 points of view. One was birthed out of trying to pay attention to what's going on with Black people. Because there, at least in the movement, there's an understanding that Black people's lives are the canary in the mine. Meaning, where Black people are failing, it's not long before other people start failing. And so we need to pay attention to that specifically for that reason. Folks get a bit visceral when you talk about all lives matter because they believe that is a distraction from actually paying attention to what's going on with Black people. I am of the belief of a hybrid approach to those things because what's happening to Black people is what has already happened to Native Americans. Right? And so, and not to white people yet, or not to middle class
Or affluent.
or affluent white people yet. But you ask a poor white person, what's it like to be white? And they have some stories that are very similar to those of people of color, right? And so that would be the distinction, and that's why people get so visceral about that, because they see all lives as a distraction to actually talking about what's really happening in the lives of Black people. But it's the same kind of dichotomy that happened with the Panthers movement in the 60s and 70s, right? So they were like, we're pro-male Black, but they were somewhat oppressing their sisters who were in the movement, helping them out, right? So there's some nuances that we still got to work out. But that's why people get so amped about the different times.
Do you think that movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, do you support that? I mean, in terms of the way they're going about trying to give the message. I mean, I understand what the issue is, but the way they're trying to get people to understand the message.
Yeah, so there are a number of different, so I've wrestled with this for myself, right? So what I understand for me is that there can be movements that happen that I support, but I don't have to do it, right? So I'm not the one to be laying down on the highway, right? So health insurance is too much, right? So I'm not that one.
I was.
What's that? You were? Okay, good. Go ahead, sister. Right? So that's not my role. I don't agree with everything that they do, but I will not be in their way as they do.
Mhm.
So there's some pieces that like the stuff around the fair stuff. I was like, what? Where is this coming from?
I read
Yeah.
a really good analogy that it's a lot like, Susan G. Komen has a big thing on breast cancer. And they're out there, breast cancer matters. It doesn't mean you don't think brain cancer matters too, and this cancer. So the people who are all lives matter, they get kind of bent out of shape because people are saying Black Lives Matter. It's like, no, to me, it's like, they're allowed to say, it's more like Black Lives Matter too.
If you want to just get people excited, there's two things you can say. If you want to get them like all weird out, you can say that Black Lives Matter, or you can say Jesus. Those two things, people, wow, what you can't say that, so forth and so on. So,
But I think there's, when you somewhat described it, Rick, first of all, you have to give folks attention.
Right.
And so you get their attention, but you have to be careful how far you carry that attention so that then folks don't listen. And I think what they're trying to do is get the attention, and then you figure out how to
Like, okay, now people are listening, and you gotta take it.
Yeah, so, yeah.
yes, sir.
I think there's a very close, the Black Lives Matter thing is very close to the whole Americans with Disabilities Act. There's people suing companies all over the state because they're not conforming to the ADA quick enough. And so there's lots of subgroups dealing with different civil rights issues.
Yep.
And I think that we need to, as a group, look at both issues and see where we want to make a statement as a group. Because I think us making a statement about Black Lives Matter, about all lives, I haven't even heard of this other group you're talking about, All Lives Matter, but and this other group who's suing all these businesses, we need to really think about what kind of statement we want to send down, because people have been paying attention to our group. That's why if they hadn't been, they would continue paying their dues. And there are people pulling out of our organization because we've made statements. Now, is that bad? I don't think so, because we made them listen. We made them aware of situations. Hopefully they'll come back, but we need to keep making statements and not being afraid of the result.
And the other thing is that people are trying to, and I don't know if you've noticed this, even in government, there's an assault on the affirmative action
Yes.
initiatives. There's assault on Americans with Disabilities Act.
Yeah.
There are all these frontal assaults. I won't name the organization that I came out of, but I was an affirmative action officer for a particular county, one of the big four, and they've totally dismantled their HR system, their diversity initiatives, blah blah blah, in the name of saving dollars, but not saving lives in terms of dollars and making sure people have sustainable housing and so forth and so on. So I think the work that we're doing is more important today than it was 10 years ago, but people are trying to make our relevance less impactful. And so that's what we have to fight against, is people trying to make us irrelevant when that is the case. Last thing I'll read is that, and anytime I hear some of those distractions, so I got this concept from reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, and the last thing that he, did. He was giving a speech, and the night of his assassination, a guy on the right side of the auditorium said, "Get your head out my pocket," distracting everybody. So everybody in the auditorium is paying attention to him as the assassin comes from the left. And so whenever I hear people trying to dissuade our cause or discredit, the things that we're doing, I'm looking at you, but I'm really paying attention to what's happening on the other side. So what else is trying to happen while we're doing this? We would be stunned and surprised at all the deregulations that happened during the O.J. Simpson trial. You'd be stunned, right? Toys, cartoons. There used to be regulation that said cartoons could not be sold as toys in stores. Now, what do we see? That the cartoons are the commercials for the toys in the stores. So I just wanted to leave it because we have to be vigilant. Oh, one last thing, if I can do a commercial. On the 13th of November, there's the Overcoming Racism Conference at Metropolitan State University. So if you can join us over there. The 13th and 14th of November. So next week, next Friday and Saturday.
It'll be on Metro's website.
I don't know, but if you go to overcomingracism.org, you can see.
Is there a charge for that?
I think there is.
No, I think it's usually free.
I'm not sure,
Unless
but
they're
it's not.
charging this year, it's
Yeah, it's
usually
not.
free.
It's yeah. So
That sounds good. Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Okay. It's like a long poll. It's okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was wonderful, Andre.